Welcome everyone to CGTN's new media coverage of the annual meeting of the New Champions 2019 here in the beautiful coastal city of Dalian, which will take place from July 1st to 3rd. So today we are going to take a sneak peek in terms of what we can expect from this year's Summer Davos 2019. I've got an expert here, quite the expert I must say, because Jeremy Jurgens is the Chief Technology Officer of the World Economic Forum, but who also founded the Summer Davos in Dalian in Tianjin. So Jeremy, welcome. We are going to be picking your brain apart in terms of what we can expect in the upcoming few days in terms of the key themes and what we're going to see and what we're going to hear at the World Economic Forum's AMNC 2019. We're also joined by our new media team's Guo Meiping. She's our tech editor, as well as CGTN's very own Sui Hui Ao. So thank you all for joining us as we take a quick look before the AMNC kicks off on a Monday. So Jeremy, welcome again. And I guess first talk to us about why the World Economic Forum chose the theme for this year's Summer Davos AMNC, Leadership 4.0, succeeding in a new era of globalization, because oftentimes when we think about globalization, we think about technology. Why leadership? Because we think about hardware and software perhaps, but Leadership 4.0, give us your thoughts.
Right. Leadership is actually essential to make the most and harness both the opportunities associated with the technology, but also mitigating the downsides. And if you just look back 12 months ago when we were in Tianjin, we're in a completely different world today. If you look at the situation as it's evolved on the North Korean Peninsula, if you look at the trade dispute between the U.S. and China, if you look at the situation in the Middle East with the tensions particularly around Iran and the U.S., we're in a completely different environment. In parallel to that, we've continued to see this rapid advance of technology, whether it's in the domain of 5G, of synthetic biology, of the application of social media. So the technology didn't stop just because the world had these challenges. So as a leader in this type of environment, you have to be able to simultaneously navigate this extremely dynamic and often volatile geopolitical context, often regional political and economic dynamics, as well as adapting to and integrating the advances that are made possible by technology.
So I know China is moving really fast in terms of technology development. So how do you see China's tech ecosystem? What are the differences you see from China versus the U.S.?
Yeah, so one of the biggest differences I see, and I love coming to China because of the energy and the speed at which things are operating, I think fundamentally is around business models. So within China, you actually see the emergence of business models that literally are not possible in the West. So what enables this? You have very high, basically, adoption and utilization of mobile technologies, high literacy rates across the population. You have a range of incomes where you have workers working at extremely low labor rates and then extremely skilled labor, all in extremely dense urban environments. So it actually enables what I would call hybrid business models that draw on the benefits of digital technologies combined with your analog physical environment. And this, came, home to me. I used, WeChat to send a package from Chengdu. Someone came to the house, picked up, and it was in Beijing, the same day, and for 20 RMB.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't see this happening in any Western economy. But if you think around where a lot of the energy and growth is in emerging markets, those markets look a lot more like Chengdu or Dalian than they look like Washington, D.C. or San Francisco. And so I think this creates a huge opportunity for Chinese technology. It also creates an amazing hunger to basically adopt these technologies, and we've seen that as well with the 5G elements. So I think that's just one example. But if I had to characterize it, it is this kind of agility, speed, and the application, and say the innovation that's associated with the application of these new technologies, and not just the underlying tech itself.
2 years ago, when I was covering the Summer Davos for the first time, also here in Dalian, back then the theme was called Achieving Inclusive Growth in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And last year in Tianjin, the theme was on shaping innovative societies. Now we are talking about leadership. Do you think it has to do with this there's some dysfunctioning in the leadership around the world, that whether it's business leaders or the government that have failed to address some of the challenges we're facing today?
Yeah, my sense is that we're in an extremely complex environment, and it's hard for any single individual to really grasp all those complexities and take decisions around that. And if you take the topic of inclusive development, I don't think we've made enough progress. If you look at the types of environmental challenges that we face, there's still significant denial whether we even have challenges. And we're not just talking about climate change here. You can look at climate change, biodiversity, deforestation, the whole range of topics. We need to take more progress there. And ultimately, the systems and frameworks around us influence it, but it's leaders that take decisions, right? So how do we make sure that our leaders are informed appropriately, that they have the best knowledge available to them, that they can take actually the important decisions they need to in this environment, and that they can pursue, what I would call a consultative process. And one of the interesting elements with an activity like the World Economic Forum event here in Dalian is that we bring together a mix of stakeholders. So everyone from Premier Li Keqiang to social innovators to media leaders such as yourselves, alongside the business, to have a kind of an open discussion around what the key issues are, as well opportunities as well as challenges.
And just a quick point in terms of the speed and application of technology here in China. I mean, I was visiting some friends and families in a bit of a more sleepy town here in Liaoning province, and I just remember distinctively in September of 2017 when I was visiting this town, no taxis in this town accepted mobile payments. And then I went back 9 months later, and all taxis were able to accept mobile payments. So in terms of the speed of things happening here in China, especially in smaller cities as well, it's catching up quite fast. So Leadership 4.0 obviously is connected with Globalization 4.0.
Yes.
For our audiences who perhaps don't know what Globalization 4.0, how would you characterize that?
Yeah, I would say that's the larger integration of all the themes that we've just talked about. So in a sense, these themes of basically the technological developments, the geopolitical developments. A lot of people say, okay, is globalization dead, right? But if we use the example of climate change or pollution, it doesn't actually recognize national borders. So these types of issues we have to work together to address. As well, you even look at a lot of the migrations that are happening across different populations, either as a result of the conflicts in certain regions, but as well as some environmentally driven migrations. And that puts new pressures on the system. So leadership has to be able to look holistically at the entire system and then say, okay, across that system, where do we make interventions? How do we do so effectively? And then how do we monitor the quality of our interventions and then adapt as we go along? It requires a highly agile form. We talk about agility and technology.
Yeah.
We need that same type of agility among our policymakers and among our political and business leaders.
Are we not close to getting there yet? A bit underprepared, you would say?
I think it depends on the country and the sector, and I won't name any names here, but we can make our own assessments looking around us on how well those are going.
Jeremy, one of the biggest impacts or negative impacts of technology revolution is the widening gap of income. That the poor is getting poorer and the rich is getting richer. And as Jack Ma is saying, at the Winter Davos this year, he said the way to solve that problem is to include more people, making them not feel left behind or disenfranchised, but that they're part of the technology revolution. But how to do that? How to bring about that solidarity, that we are all part of the shared benefit of this technology revolution?
Yeah, I think this is requires a multifaceted response. Let me just touch on a couple elements. First is the role of data and how we use and how we develop the machine learning algorithms that actually harness that data. To date, much of the data has been generated in North America. It's often with affluent white male populations. And as a result, when you run these deep learning algorithms that have to go across extremely large data sets, they're inherently biased, right? So, we shouldn't just immediately delegate or defer to the machine based on the data. We actually have to understand how that data was sourced, what were some of the challenges there. And so when you bring China into an equation like this, all of a sudden you open up a much larger data set, right? There's some, definite benefits to having 1.4 billion people there, and how do you expand that? And then you have to look across not just the Chinese population, but other populations around the world. That's one domain there. I think as well as then if you think of the application of those technologies, not just to say banking applications or facial recognition algorithms, preferences, start thinking about very serious things like medical technology, right? So we have increasing progress that we're making in understanding the human genome, and CRISPR now is maybe 7 or 8 years old. If you look at CRISPR-Cas9 and our ability to edit genetic structures, we're now moving to gene synthesis, which is the ability to write from scratch entirely new structures, right? So this is like the difference of taking Shakespeare and making a few changes to the couplets, and then compared to just going in with a blank sheet and write it from scratch, where writing anything could be possible. Now, in that kind of environment, if all of your data sources are on a narrow audience, we may actually be proposing solutions inadvertently that don't actually meet the needs of the populations we're trying to serve. So data is one area. A second area is around access. So how do we make sure that we have access to technologies? We've done work at the World Economic Forum of trying to increase internet access on the African continent, for example. So how can we look at different mechanisms to either allow for individual access or even village level access so people can tap into this kind of information and knowledge economy and get the benefits from there. I think the other is the responsible use of technology. And I'm sure our technology companies may not like this, but sometimes it's also good to know when to turn it off.
Right.
Right. When should we have a discussion among ourselves and not necessarily, leave everything to the experience of the electronic device or to the algorithm. So I think human contact, human interaction still matters because we're not going to wash our hair with digital shampoo, eat digital food.
That's just getting started, right? The ethics of technological advances. This conversation is still quite early, I would say.
Yeah, I think we're very early on, and we probably are not having as broad-based of a discussion as we should be on that. All of my colleagues at our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco, they're definitely trying to accelerate and enlarge the discussion, particularly around AI ethics, among other topics.
Also use 5G more responsibly. I think that's one of the sessions this year among the 200 meetings.
5G is definitely the trend, right, for this year. Do you see this year as the year of 5G? Because, China is speeding up the construction of 5G network and countries in Europe. So what's your thought on 5G?
Yeah, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd have probably said the next year. I think we were in the year of the marketing of 5G. And, normally then the application follows a little bit behind. As we all know, there's been a number of complications. Technology's been at the heart of many of the discussions around the U.S.-China trade dispute. You have some incumbent actors that are, actually not necessarily entirely comfortable with China taking a leading role in driving 5G technology. You still have misunderstandings on what the application of that means. In a sense, a lot of the regulatory and policy environment isn't necessarily ready for always-on sensors embedded in every part of our physical environment in our daily lives. So what are the implications of that? On one side, you can see a number of opportunities that emerge from that, but there's also some other challenges we just have to understand. Okay, what does this mean around personal privacy? What does this mean around who has access to the information that's generated there? I think an interesting case in point recently is if you look at San Francisco, they said they're going to ban the utilization of facial technology among, within the government, but that doesn't apply to private companies. So, the next question is, well, would I rather have the private companies have access to this technology but not the government? Or would I rather have the government have access to that and then, be more cautious in the utilization by the companies? And I think how different populations respond to that question actually then shapes their own perceptions on their government's use of those technologies, on their corporations' use of those technologies, and so on. But interesting question. So there's probably not a one-size-fits-all answer for everybody, but it's definitely a debate we should be having.
But we're excited to try the 5G technology, right, as customers, consumers. Like, I know this venue is covered by 5G, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There are some demonstrations
Going on upstairs as well.
Yeah.
Jeremy, do you think we can get past this mindset of technologies from certain countries as being a threat? Because, look, I mean, the founder of Huawei has talked about technological cooperation around the world, and President Xi Jinping recently at the G20 also mentioned pooling global wisdom together to sort of solve our common challenges together. Can we get past that mindset and actually make sure that technology does indeed win for all?
Yeah, that would be the aspiration, that we could move from this strategic competition to strategic cooperation. My own suspicion is that there will be a mix of both. And that would still be better than not cooperating on anything. So if we can find those areas where we need to cooperate, I suspect, though, that there will continue to be cooperation and that this balkanization of the digital ecosystem, of the technological ecosystem, will continue to be a risk. There's an underlying political economy there, and again, different actors with different perspectives. But at the heart, the ability to actually have a conversation around that, to dialogue, to maintain the connections, I think that'll be extremely important as we navigate this. And we may learn from what we've seen among technology companies, right? They have this concept of frenemies, right? So in some cases, you need to work together. And in other areas, you say, okay, we're in competition. And as long as you have a sense of what the framework is for that competition, that there's shared understandings of the norms and rules, that actually may be healthy. It may actually also further drive innovation, drive choice, and it can be there.
This is why I think it would be particularly interesting to hear the perspectives from some of the U.S. delegates. I know this year there are around 300 participants are coming from the U.S., and that is very noticeable given all the tensions and trade talks going on between China and the U.S., which are two arguably the technological rivalries of this century.
Well, hopefully, again, we cannot, not use the word rivalry and more about cooperation, I guess, to see where we go from here.
So, I strongly believe, we have 1,800 participants joining us from nearly 100 countries here in Dalian. And the people that are coming here because they want to cooperate.
Yeah.
Right. So they already have a bias when they come in, but I consider that a positive bias, and it's a great starting point, right?
Yeah.
Because not everybody has to get along, but already if we can start facilitating those kind of cooperations, that mutual understanding, that goes a long ways when each of these individuals return to their home offices, to their home organizations, to help spread the understanding and kind of create a mutual opportunity for strategic cooperation there.
What about education, Jeremy? I mean, if you started a foundation for societies to be prepared for the fourth industrial revolution, what kind of educational reforms, perhaps, do we need to see?
Yeah, so you have the kind of base level, foundational educational skills that I think largely is going in the right direction. We need to see more women being educated in developing countries. We need to make sure there's equal access. I think China is a great example of what's possible when you bring literacy to the entire population, when you educate the entire population, and much of China's growth, can be traced back to that. And we need to create those same opportunities elsewhere. When we start looking beyond, we need to actually start thinking about adult education. And what does reskilling at scale look like?
Yeah, at scale is, I think, quite important.
Yeah, it's at the scale, right? This isn't going to be, okay, we do some classes at our local community center. We're talking about hundreds and thousands, millions of people that need to be reskilled. And it shouldn't be so simplistic as to say somebody who's a delivery driver before and their job has been taken over by an autonomous drone from one of Chinese leading tech companies, that somehow that driver will then become a computer coder, right? We need to actually look at what the bridging mechanisms are there. A second area, and I'm visiting a number of factories while I'm here in China. I'll be down in Qingdao and Shenzhen and visiting some of the flagship Chinese factories to see how they're handling this tension of automating the capabilities within the factory. But then what are the kind of pre-production roles that you create for people before the product's manufactured? And what is the post-production servicing models that you put in place when you start thinking around new business models? So we're going to have to take a very holistic and systemic perspective on this, and throughout that, be in a position that we reskill workers at scale.
Meiping?
So you mentioned that we have to reskill the workers because as we mentioned about artificial intelligence, sometimes might take over our jobs. So do you see we can set this kind of harmony between robots and human in the future? Because apparently we are experiencing a lot of like job taking by those kind of things. Like in China, we have drones for delivery, and in factories we use machines to instead of workers.
Yeah, so much of this area I'd like to rather think around augmenting the capabilities. So less as AI is basically taking the jobs away, but how do we actually use artificial intelligence tools to augment our existing capabilities, displace some of the mundane and routine work?
Right.
And there's a lot of jobs that I actually think most humans don't want to do, they don't enjoy doing. If we can actually automate those, all the better. And then the question is actually then, can we create new jobs and new roles that leverage the capacities and capabilities that make us human? Whether that's our emotions, that's judgment, curiosity. Some of these things in the future may be simulated by machines, but where we are today, they're not. And humans still have a very important role. And ultimately, we do live in a physical world.
Yeah.
And speaking of AI, I earlier visited like a data labeling company. In fact, a lot of the jobs were created because of artificial intelligence. You need the groundwork to be set for artificial intelligence. Basically, labelers were labeling those like cars and architecture and buildings so that the automation, the driverless cars would know when they see the obstacles on the road. So it's actually a very important, a different way of looking at things.
Yeah.
So making AI more about helping human beings.
Right.
Yeah.
As opposed to see it as a being threat to our existing
And
jobs.
we've developed some artificial tools within our own organization to use for our work, right? So when we want to scan the entire universe of issues that we should be considering, who are the thought leaders in each of these different domains, what are the latest dynamics in any given set of issues, we've built a set of artificial intelligence machine learning tools that continually monitor the external environment. They look for weak signals about new developments in that domain, and cover a broad range of sources across different languages to basically be able to help us monitor that environment and not fall into a trap of only listening to one media channel. Of course, if it's your channel, I'm sure it's okay. But
no, we encourage different perspectives as well.
As well, right? And so for all the non-English speakers out there that need some choices, so we use tools to do that. So it basically helps our teams operate faster. They have a broader range of perspectives than they would without the AI, and they're able to approach discovery and sense making in a much faster and agile way than they would have without the tools.
All right. I mean, we can't let you go without asking you about China's role in Globalization 4.0, right, Jeremy? You've been in the country for a long time. You have a lot of experience here. What do you think about China's role as we enter into the Fourth Industrial Revolution? What can it contribute, I guess?
Yeah. So I think China is absolutely critical to the Fourth Industrial Revolution and to globalization and to the 21st century. Again, many of the lessons that China has learned through experience of basically growing the economy at scale. When we talk around the economy's not growing as fast as it was, it's still over 6%.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody would love to have a economy, at this scale, growing at that and being able to sustain that over as many years as China has. How China has actually leveraged both the educational system, skilling up the population at large, combined with the application and development of new technologies, new business models, new applications. All of these things are extremely valuable. And if we look at a growing global population, most of the world that needs these tools the most look more like China did 20 years ago than Europe or the US did 20 years ago. So I think the ability of China to be a role model and a leader in the harnessing and application of both some of the economic models, some of the social approaches, and the utilization of technology is absolutely essential.
So Kai-Fu Lee has mentioned that one of the competitive advantages of China, like you said, is scale, right?
Yes.
Especially scale in terms of data as well. And he made an argument saying that this perhaps can also eventually lead to more technological innovation as well. Because right now, mostly the tech innovation coming from the United States in terms of primary research, but can scale, do you think, eventually allow China to increase its innovation potential as well in terms of research?
Yeah, it'll definitely help. And this is I've spoken with a number of my friends in the Chinese research and fundamental space, and you often say, okay, we're 20 to 25 years behind on some of the fundamental research. I think we'll bridge that gap over time, but the most important element is the application, right? So we had electrical vehicles 100 years ago, but they're actually only just being actually applied in the last few years. They're becoming mainstream. So China's ability to apply the technologies, roll them out at scale, find business models that can associate with those, is actually world class, right? It is, I think, the premier economy in the world at being able to do so. And so, yes, we need to continue to invest in basic research, whether it's in medicine, in space, in science, etc. But the application for improving the quality of lives of the average person on the street, they'd like to see that improvement today.
Yeah.
And I think there, the applications here, the overall business environment is much faster, the velocity, and the turnover and the rate of change, the agility, the ability to adapt. I mean, you go down to Shenzhen, any of the big hubs in China, and you see that kind of speed and agility that you don't necessarily see outside of just a few urban centers outside.
Yeah.
And the completeness of industry chain is a huge advantage that China has as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of industrial clusters, you go down to Shenzhen, and within almost a 1 hour driving radius, there are hundreds of suppliers that can instantly iterate and respond to
Which
demands.
makes Chinese market kind of irreplaceable at the moment, or at least for a short while.
Yeah,
Definitely.
maybe.
So how's your life changed in China? Because you based in China 10 years ago, right?
Yes.
So it must be really different in terms of technology and every other aspects. Did you visit China very often, right, for this Davos?
Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, some of the things I like are the trains, right?
Yeah.
Just the
high-speed
high-speed
trains.
trains and the ability to move around quickly. The ability to call the apps. I think all of us have experienced, waiting, trying to get a taxi.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the evening. The subway infrastructure, I remember being in Beijing with just the 2 lines,
Yeah.
and then gradually expanding
That's
that.
like
You can
amazing.
travel all over. Last time I went to CCTV, I actually took the subway
Yeah.
and just to be there on time. So I think the investment in the physical infrastructure is definitely noticeable. Again, when I was in Chengdu not too long ago, the quality of life of the middle class citizen is actually higher than what it is in some of the countries we think of richer and more developed. And I've traveled in both, and I'm actually thinking, okay, I wouldn't mind being middle class here.
Yeah.
This is quite a good place to be, and high quality of housing infrastructure, the ability of this kind of digital ecosystem that you can tap into these services and capabilities at any time, and of course, great food.
Yeah, absolutely. The food in Chengdu, I think, is top notch. Is rated by the UN as one of the top culinary destinations in the world. But how do other countries, perhaps, which are not so developed technologically right now, make sure that they aren't left behind in the fourth industrial revolution? Because things are happening so fast these days where societies find it a little bit harder to respond. How do these countries perhaps adapt?
Yeah, I think one is actually looking at how we can harness the capabilities, and this is where trade is actually, super important. How do we make sure we exchange ideas, change services, products and goods to actually help improve the quality of life and knowledge, right? How do we make sure that we get the knowledge shared across the different groups? And, here I'm relatively positive. We have, a number of challenges. But I think this is one that we can, we'll continue to see development. And if you talk to some people, they don't recognize the advances that China has made in the last 30 years, let alone the last 20, let alone the last 5, right? And if you look China 5 years ago, it looks nothing like it does today. Similarly, in Africa, we've seen similar changes, right? So a lot of people still imagine trafficking. They have also vibrant ecosystems. They're not as well distributed as they need to be. They're not serving as much of the population they need to be. But there's actually huge dynamism in Africa and other countries that some people in the West may traditionally associate as being underdeveloped or backwards.
Gotcha. Well,
Well, I think there'll be a lot of things to watch for at this year's event. I'm going to attend the opening ceremony, which Premier Li Keqiang is going to deliver a keynote speech. And the Premier Li has been attending the Davos Forum since he took office in 2013. So it'll be interesting to hear what new messages he's going to deliver this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Should be more messages about openness and collaboration that we see from the tech frontier, along with trade as well. Yeah, maybe.
And I'll be really exciting too to try out some of the 5G experience applications over there, because I already seen some of the VR powered by 5G and stuff. So I think, yeah, AI and 5G is definitely what we're like really exciting about for the Summer Davos.
Well, CGTN will also be hosting several panel discussions here at the Summer Davos as well. My colleague Tim Wei will be hosting one on the future of the Belt and Road Initiative, and it'll be interesting to see if we can tie in the future of the BRI with developments in the fourth industrial revolution. And I'll be hosting a panel actually on China's new pitch to foreign businesses, implications for the foreign investment law, and what that means for market access for foreign firms here in the country. Dalian is a very international city, very digital city. For Northeast China, there's thousands of foreign enterprises based in this city, so it's going to be quite an amazing experience. What are you looking out for this year's Summer Davos? What are you expecting to hear from delegates and participants?
Good. Well, I'm listening to actually helping facilitate some of this strategic cooperation that we discussed. Very much looking forward to the Premier Li Keqiang's opening message to the delegates. And I'll be attending the CGTN sessions also just to hear how your take is on that.
Great, welcome.
And look at that as well as meeting old friends and making new ones while we're here.
Fantastic. And Leadership 4.0, I mean, we have to list out a few that you think are important, right, to succeed in this age. Off the top of your head, is there anything you feel that some of the key leadership qualities needed to thrive in this era?
Yeah, I think first is this ability to adapt and pursue an agile approach. The world's continually changing. We need to change with it. All right, so you have to think of an adaptive strategy. The second is an emphasis on inclusivity. Right, so we need to actually include perspectives from different cultures, make sure that we have a broad gender recognition within that, as well as different age groups, right? Make sure that we hear the voices of the young alongside those that are working and those that are already, retired and are, enjoying, their senior years after all their hard work. These are important elements. And we have to continually take the pulse on these technological advances, because it's moving so quickly that if you don't, you won't be able to fully harness the opportunities. Yeah. So these are a couple of key elements I look to when I think about the Leadership 4.0 concept.
Got it. It's interesting. I actually did a little word map, the word cloud, based on the participants, the program agenda for this year's Summer Davos. And you mentioned youth. It's interesting. Youth is actually one of the top 10 most common words that show up in the program. So I guess that says a lot about where the future is going. So very fascinating discussion, Huiyao. Maybe is there anything else you would like to add or ask Jeremy before we wrap up?
I actually have one question.
Yeah.
Because we are in the 5G era right now.
Yes.
What's your expectation of the next new tech explosion thing?
Yep.
Because a couple years ago it was VR, AR, and 2 years ago it was artificial intelligence. This year is 5G. So what do you think the next thing will be?
Radar. One is the developments around quantum technology and the advances that are taking place in quantum. The second is around space technologies and as we see a commercialization in the space sector, moving from nation states driving space programs to individual corporations being able to take a lead there. That opens up an entirely new realm of innovation. I'm particularly keen around the advances on synthetic biology as well as CRISPR. I think we're just at the early stages of seeing what is possible there. And then if you think through the entire domain of 5G and what happens when you do start embedding sensors and having continuous communication, kind of pervasive computing all around you, and what does that unlock, and how do you navigate that area? So there's a couple of areas that are top of my mind.
Yeah.
My final question would be on the deeper cooperation between WEF and China. We know that this is an event that alternates between Tianjin and Dalian, two port cities. What do you think WEF has brought to brought to Dalian in terms of injecting vigor and vitality?
Yeah, so I'd almost step back a little bit and look at a very long cooperation going back already to 1979. Right. So the World Economic Forum has consistently been engaged for roughly 40 years, working with China, trying to facilitate that growth. Initially when we came here, we were introducing foreign investment into China, right? Actually helping people understand China, bringing foreign investors here. Increasingly in our role as an international platform, I see us actually helping bridge understanding and helping facilitate some of the strategic cooperation among Chinese leaders and other nationalities in a way. Ultimately, it's up to the individuals themselves, but we can provide a kind of a neutral place where people come to understand one another and dialogue around their respective concerns, positions, and aspirations.
With also the goal of committed to improving the state of the world, I guess, is the overlying theme that that is surrounding the World Economic Forum. So, with that, we're going to wrap things up. Thank you very much, Jeremy Durkin is the Chief Technology Officer at the World Economic Forum and also the founder of the Summer Davos here in Dalian as well as in Tianjin. My name is Michael Wong. I'm also joined by Su Huiao and, of course, Guo Meiping. So keep it here.